So usually when we talk about an Olympic finish line, there's a very specific, like, highly sanitized image that comes to mind, right?
No, absolutely. It's this, heavily branded, perfectly orchestrated pinnacle of human achievement.
Exactly. Like, we expect the soaring cinematic music playing in the background.
The tears of joy, the perfectly manicured stadium.
Right. And some athlete pushing through a branded tape in this, like, moment of pure, unadulterated glory.
It's the ultimate sports fantasy.
Yeah. And for a few fleeting minutes on this boiling August afternoon in 1904, that is exactly what the crowd inside the stadium in St. Louis believed they were witnessing.
They really thought they were getting that picture-perfect moment.
So let me paint this picture for you based on the historical accounts, because honestly, the sensory details here are just incredible.
They really are.
The stadium is absolutely roaring. The temperature is hovering right around 90 degrees Fahrenheit.
Which is just punishing.
Oh, completely. So you have thousands of people packed into these wooden grandstands, and they're sweating through heavy Edwardian clothing.
Not exactly modern activewear.
Not at all. And this brass band is striking up a triumphant tune, like playing their hearts out.
Huh.
Probably some Sousa march, given the era.
Right, very typical for the time.
Yeah, and then this runner named Fred Lorz emerges from the stadium tunnel.
Yeah.
And he's grinning.
Smiling after a marathon.
Right. He's draped in an American flag, and he is looking remarkably fresh.
Which, honestly, if you think about human physiology, that should have been the very first red flag for anyone paying attention.
Right, because it's bordering on superhuman.
Yeah.
I mean, he's supposedly just run nearly 25 miles through oppressive humidity.
Humidity and rolling hills.
Yeah, and yet he isn't stumbling. He isn't, gasping for air. He is standing there totally composed.
He's actually shaking hands with the president's daughter, right?
Exactly. Alice Roosevelt is there. She's laughing in delight and getting ready to present the winner's wreath.
It's like a movie scene.
It really is. You have officials in straw boater hats literally reaching for the gold medal. It is a perfect textbook Olympic moment.
Capturing everything the organizers wanted the world to see, really. It is the absolute picture of athletic triumph.
Right down to the presidential daughter and the cheering crowds.
Yeah, it was exactly the kind of legitimizing spectacle the Young Olympic Committee was desperate for at that time.
But then we get what I can only describe as, like, the curdle.
The whole thing just unraveled.
Illusion shatters in real time, because suddenly, from somewhere near the tunnel entrance, witnesses start shouting.
And they are not cheering.
No, not at all. They are yelling a very specific, very inconvenient detail. They're shouting that Fred Lorz didn't actually run the whole race.
Wait, they literally call him out right there.
Right there in the stadium. They're pointing at him, yelling that they just saw him riding down the course in a motor car.
Oh, wow. So the music falters.
The music stops. The cheering completely dissipates into this, like, confused, angry murmuring sweeping across the grandstands.
The wreath gets pulled away.
The medal is pulled back. Alice Roosevelt is quickly ushered away from him. And suddenly, the entire stadium realizes the winner standing before them is a total fake.
It's just incredible. And while all this high society drama is unfolding in the stadium out on the actual course, the real race is still happening.
Yeah.
And it is nothing short of a waking medical nightmare.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because our mission for today's deep dive is to look at exactly what was happening out on that course.
And it is a wild ride.
It really is. We are unpacking the 1904 St. Louis Olympic Marathon. Yeah. A race so absurd, so poorly planned, and so downright dangerous that it is widely considered the worst run event in the history of international sports.
Without a doubt.
And we are pulling this from a massive stack of historical accounts, the official 1904 Olympic Games reports, and even primary source diaries written by the trainers who were on the ground that day.
The first-hand accounts are just wild.
They really are. So if you're someone who thinks of the Olympics as this, like, perfectly regulated, mathematically precise showcase of human optimization, you need to hear this story.
Oh, prepare to have that image shattered.
Seriously. Because this is a masterclass in what happens when wild ambition collides with the total, absolute absence of safety infrastructure.
And the disaster wasn't just, a byproduct of bad luck. It was practically engineered into the foundational setup of the event.
Right.
Like, before we even touch on the fake winners or the runners who were literally poisoned, and we are definitely going to explore the physiological mechanics of that poisoning.
Oh, we have to.
We have to examine the blueprint for this disaster. We need to look at the incredibly flawed stage that was built for these 32 athletes before the starting gun even fired.
Right, because this wasn't just a standalone marathon in a vacuum. The 1904 Olympics were grafted onto the Louisiana Purchase Exposition.
The World's Fair.
Exactly. This massive World's Fair in St. Louis. And when we talk about a World's Fair in 1904, we are talking about a level of sensory overload and administrative chaos that is just hard for a modern mind to comprehend.
It was immense.
This wasn't a closed-off Olympic Village. It was a sprawling, noisy, wildly unregulated global exhibition.
That context is vital, really, because the Olympic movement at this point was only in its third iteration.
Right, they were still figuring it out.
Completely. The 1896 Athens Games were this kind of novelty. The 1900 Paris Games were famously disorganized. And so by 1904, the International Olympic Committee was hungry for prestige.
They wanted to be taken seriously.
Exactly. They wanted a signature spectacle to prove the Games were a serious, enduring institution. But the people organizing it locally, they were not operating with anything resembling modern sports science.
Not even close.
The man in charge of the physical culture exhibits, and by extension this marathon, was an organizer named James Edward Sullivan.
And Sullivan is such a fascinating character to analyze here.
Oh, he really is.
Because he held a lot of power in American amateur athletics, but he also held some genuinely bizarre ideas about human biology.
Bizarre is almost an understatement.
Yeah, the sources emphasize that Sullivan had a deeply held scientific conviction that deliberately restricting a distance runner's water intake during exercise built endurance.
He literally believed that drinking water freely was actively detrimental to athletic performance.
Wait, so he thought giving runners water would make them worse?
Yeah, he was operating under this somewhat prevailing, albeit entirely misguided, theory of the era.
Wow.
The medical thinking in some circles of 1904 was tied to this idea of vitalism, this belief that the body had a finite amount of internal energy.
Okay.
So they theorized that introducing water into the system during extreme exertion would somehow bog down the internal organs.
Bog them down, like a flooded engine.
Exactly. They thought it would cause catastrophic cramping or, dilute the blood's oxygen-carrying capacity.
That is just wild.
They viewed sweat not as an essential cooling mechanism, but as a leak that needed to be managed, or even a sign of weakness that needed to be trained out of the athlete.
But wait, even if we account for the era, like humans have been running long distances and doing hard agricultural labor in the heat for thousands of years.
Thousands of years, yeah.
We intuitively know to drink water when it's hot. How did a guy in charge of an international athletic event convince highly trained athletes to ignore their most basic biological survival instinct?
Well, it comes down to the power dynamics of early sports administration.
Okay, how so?
Sullivan wasn't just an organizer, he was a gatekeeper for amateur status. If you wanted to compete, you followed the rules set by the governing bodies.
You had to play his game.
Exactly. And furthermore, sports science was essentially in its infancy. It was the Wild West of physiological experimentation.
Right.
So Sullivan basically saw the 1904 marathon as a massive live-action laboratory to test his dehydration theory on elite subjects.
He essentially used the Olympic marathon as a petri dish.
A giant, humid petri dish.
And because he wanted to prove this theory, he dictated the logistics of the course. Across a route that was roughly 24.85 miles long.
Which is brutal in itself.
Yeah, and just as a quick side note for you listening,
Yeah.
the modern 26.2-mile standard wasn't even established until the London Games in 1908.
Right, the distances fluctuated back then.
Right. So organizers provided exactly 2 places to get water on this entire course.
2 stops.
They placed a water tower at mile 6 and a roadside well at mile 12. And that is it.
For the entire race.
For nearly 25 miles of running in the American Midwest in August.
Biologically speaking, running a marathon in 90-degree heat with only 2 early water stops is a recipe for severe, potentially fatal dehydration.
I can't even imagine.
The human body cools itself through the evaporation of sweat. Without water to replenish that lost fluid, blood volume begins to decrease.
So your blood is physically shrinking in volume.
Basically, yes. The blood thickens, and then the heart has to pump exponentially harder just to deliver oxygen to the muscles. Core body temperature spikes, and that leads directly toward heat stroke.
And if the lack of water wasn't bad enough, we have to look at the physical terrain of this course. Because it wasn't a paved, predictable city street.
Oh, no. Far from it.
This route was carved out of unpaved, rutted, rural country roads outside of St. Louis. It climbed 7 distinct steep hills.
7 hills?
And some sections were literally covered in crushed stone.
Which profoundly affects the biomechanics of the run. Running on uneven dirt and crushed stone requires constant micro-adjustments in the ankles, the knees, and the hips.
That was way more tiring.
Hugely. It burns significantly more energy and fatigues those stabilizing muscles much faster than running on a flat paved surface would.
And then, as if all of that wasn't enough, the organizers added a completely manufactured element of danger purely for the sake of pageantry.
This is the part that just blows my mind.
Right. Because this was a prestige event, they wanted it monitored. So they organized a small convoy of official automobiles and men on horseback to accompany the runners along these unpaved rural roads.
And we have to remember what automobiles were in 1904.
Right, not exactly a Prius.
No, these were heavy, primitive machines with massive tires driving on dry, pulverized dirt roads in late August.
It created an inescapable environmental hazard.
It was a dust bowl.
The source described these cars kicking up choking, thick, opaque clouds of dust directly into the faces of the runners trailing behind them.
Just brutal.
Imagine running at your absolute maximum heart rate, desperately gasping for oxygen, and instead, you are inhaling a localized dust storm.
Every breath is just dirt.
We are going to look at the exact physiological trauma that dust caused to one of the runners a bit later, but you basically have this field of 32 starters lining up for what is essentially an unsurvivable obstacle course.
The conditions were actively hostile to human life, and yet this brutal stage attracted a remarkably eclectic group of competitors.
Really eclectic.
You might assume that anyone lining up for an Olympic marathon would be a highly disciplined, anxious professional who had been tapering their training and optimizing their diet for months.
Right, the stereotypical elite athlete.
But the 1904 roster completely shatters that assumption.
Yeah, I was looking at the starting roster in the official reports, and there was one guy who immediately stands out because his entire presence is just like a defiance of what we consider an elite athlete.
Felix Carvajal.
Felix Carvajal.
He is a fascinating case study in sheer, unadulterated human resilience. He was a Cuban mail carrier.
A mailman.
A mailman. He had no institutional backing, no wealthy sponsors, and no formal coaching.
Nothing.
What he did have was an immense natural aerobic capacity that he developed from just running delivery routes across Cuba.
And his journey just to get to the starting line is a saga in itself. Like, he literally ran around town squares in Havana putting on public running exhibitions.
Like a busker, but for running.
Exactly. He's basically passing a hat around to crowdfund his travel expenses.
It's incredible.
He raises enough money, boards a boat, and arrives in New Orleans. And what does our highly motivated Olympic hopeful do upon arriving in America?
Oh, this is the best part.
He immediately enters a dice game and gambles almost all of his money away.
The psychology of the gambler intersecting with the endurance athlete is just such an interesting overlap.
Right.
Both require a certain tolerance for high-stakes risk and this, irrational belief in one's own luck or endurance.
Definitely a thrill seeker.
But practically, it meant Carvajal was essentially destitute before he even reached the host city.
Yeah. He likely hitchhiked or walked a significant portion of the way from New Orleans all the way to Missouri.
Just staggering to think about.
He arrives at the starting line of the Olympic marathon, hungry, broke, and wearing his everyday street clothes.
Street clothes.
He has a long-sleeved white shirt, heavy dark trousers, and stiff leather walking shoes.
Not running shoes, leather walking shoes.
Right. And right there at the starting line, seeing the other runners in their athletic gear, someone helps him take a pair of scissors and hack his trousers off at the knee to make makeshift shorts.
Right there on the starting line.
That is his Olympic uniform.
If we think about the biomechanics of what he is about to attempt, it's staggering.
Sounds painful.
Running 24 miles in heavy, stiff leather walking shoes with zero arch support, no shock absorption, and heavy fabric chafing against his skin.
Most modern runners would be out after a few miles.
Most modern runners would develop debilitating blisters and joint pain within the first 5 miles. Easily.
But Carvajal didn't seem bothered. In fact, his behavior during the race was incredibly jovial.
He was having a great time.
He was so chatty. Instead of focusing entirely on his pacing, breezing, or form, he would run for a stretch, and then he would literally stop running to walk over and chat with the spectators lining the rural roads.
Just totally pausing the race.
Yeah. He was practicing his English, cracking jokes, interacting with the crowd, and then he would just jog off again.
Which raises an incredible point about sports psychology and, accidental pacing strategy. By stopping to chat and treating this brutal endurance event like a social promenade, Carvajal might have inadvertently adopted the most brilliant survival tactic possible for those specific conditions.
That's exactly what I was wondering. Like, while the serious athletes were rigidly adhering to their pacing, grinding their bodies into a state of total collapse in the 90-degree heat.
Carvajal was microdosing his recovery.
Right. He was letting his heart rate drop. He was refusing to overexert himself.
Precisely. He was running a natural interval session, essentially. He was listening to his body's feedback loop rather than forcing it to conform to an arbitrary concept of a continuous marathon pace.
It's genius, really.
However, this lack of structure did lead to one of the most infamous moments in sports history.
Because at some point during the race, Carvajal became hungry.
Naturally.
Which makes perfect biological sense. He had been broke for days. His glycogen stores were probably entirely depleted before the starting gun even fired.
He was running on empty.
Completely. So he is running along the course, and he spots an apple orchard off to the side of the road.
And in true Carvajal fashion, he just abandons the marked Olympic route, walks into the orchard, and begins foraging for fruit.
But the apples he finds are completely rotten.
Oh, yeah.
And he is so hungry that he eats them anyway.
Yeah.
The biological response is immediate.
Immediate and violent.
The bacteria from the rotten fruit hits his empty, highly stressed digestive system, and he develops crippling stomach cramps.
Unbearable pain.
He is in so much agony that he actually lies down on the side of the dirt road in the middle of the Olympic marathon to take a nap and let the cramps pass.
To contextualize this medically, when you introduce aggressive pathogens into a digestive system during extreme cardiovascular exertion, the body basically goes into a state of shock.
Because all the blood is elsewhere.
Exactly. Blood is already being diverted away from the stomach to the working muscles and the skin for cooling. So the gastrointestinal tract effectively shuts down.
Wow.
The cramping Carvajal experienced would have been agonizing. His smooth muscle tissue was violently contracting.
So he takes a nap on the side of the road. He eventually wakes up. The cramps have subsided just enough for him to stand. He rejoins the race.
And this is the craziest part.
And he finishes fourth.
Fourth. It defies all modern understanding of sports physiology.
It really does.
To survive acute food poisoning mid-race, with zero formal preparation, wearing heavy street shoes, stopping to socialize, taking a nap, and still beating 28 other highly trained athletes.
It's mind-blowing.
It suggests his raw genetic VO2 max and lactate threshold were off the charts. If he had modern coaching and nutrition, there is no telling what he could have achieved.
It is an incredible testament to his raw talent. But Carvajal's chaotic journey was entirely his own choice, right? He had total agency over his gambling, his attire, and his detours.
Yes, he did.
If we look at the other side of this starting line, we see runners who are stripped of that agency entirely, finding themselves in this marathon as an extension of a deeply uncomfortable, exploitative situation.
This is a vital piece of the historical record that requires careful unpacking. We have to talk about Len Tao and Jan Mashiani, two Sangha tribesmen from South Africa.
Right, because they were not in St. Louis as invited, credentialed athletes representing a National Olympic Committee.
No, not at all.
They were there as part of the Louisiana Purchase Exposition's Anthropology Days.
The Anthropology Days were a series of events organized by the fair that essentially functioned as human zoos.
It's just horrifying to think about.
It is. The organizers brought indigenous people from around the globe to St. Louis to be put on display, often forcing them to participate in contrived athletic events to test their physical prowess against Western standards.
Yeah.
It was a manifestation of the era's pervasive colonial mindset, treating human beings as living dioramas.
Exactly. And Tao and Mashiani were specifically brought over to be part of an exhibit recreating scenes from the recently concluded Boer War.
They were brought halfway across the world to act as living props.
But when the marathon was announced, they somehow ended up in the starting lineup.
Yeah, the historical records are a bit murky on exactly how it happened, but they essentially stepped out of the exhibit and onto the Olympic course.
And they entered the race under conditions that were vastly different from the other competitors. Neither man wore shoes.
Barefoot.
They ran the entire 24-plus miles on those scorching, unpaved, crushed stone country roads entirely barefoot.
Let's talk about the biomechanics of that for a second, because running barefoot on pavement is one thing. Running barefoot on rutted dirt and sharp gravel is entirely different.
Yeah, it sounds like torture.
It requires an incredibly developed fat pad on the heel and extremely thick calluses, which they undoubtedly possess.
Right, from their daily lives.
But barefoot running also completely changes your foot strike. Instead of a heel strike, which a shoe allows, a barefoot runner naturally shifts to a midfoot or forefoot strike to absorb the shock.
Okay, so landing more on the toes.
Yes, which uses the calf muscles and the Achilles tendon much more aggressively as natural shock absorbers.
Which means their calves were doing exponentially more work than the runners in shoes. And they were still doing exceptionally well.
Incredibly well.
But the sheer lack of boundaries on this course created an unimaginable hazard for Len Tao. Because it wasn't a closed course with barricades and crowd control.
It was basically open rural farmland.
Yeah, and at one point, Len Tao is running his race, holding a very strong pace, when a pack of aggressive stray farm dogs spots him.
Oh, right. And these would have been territorial dogs, completely unaccustomed to thousands of people and runners descending on their rural roads.
The dogs aggressively give chase. And they don't just snap at his heels. They chase Len Tao completely off the marked route.
He had to flee.
He is forced to run for his life through cornfields and dense rural brush, sprinting in this frantic zigzag pattern just to escape this pack of dogs.
Physiologically, this introduces a massive, sudden spike of adrenaline and cortisol into a system that is already nearing exhaustion.
It's the worst time for a panic response.
Exactly. When you are chased by a predator, your body initiates a fight-or-flight response. Your heart rate violently spikes. You burn through whatever tiny reserves of glycogen you have left in seconds.
And he ends up adding nearly a mile of extra distance to his race, just trying to outrun these dogs through a cornfield.
An extra mile at race pace, while terrified.
And yet, despite the barefoot running on gravel, the heat, and this massive, terrifying detour that spiked his heart rate to maximum capacity, Len Tao managed to return to the road, re-enter the race, and finish in 9th place.
9th place.
And John Marchiani finishes 12th.
It is a profound display of physical dominance and psychological fortitude.
Truly.
They took an environment that was actively, aggressively hostile to them, both culturally in terms of the fair's exploitative structure and physically on the course, and they excelled in it.
They crushed it.
It is a powerful subversion of the entire premise of the anthropology days. The fair sought to put them on display as curiosities, and instead they proved themselves to be among the elite endurance athletes on the planet.
It's a remarkable piece of history that deserves to be highlighted. But, as much as we marvel at Carvajal's apples and Tao's escape from the dogs, we cannot lose sight of the fact that the very same conditions that created these wild anecdotes—
the lack of barricades, the unpaved roads, the official vehicles—
right, all of that created a deeply perilous environment. The farce of this race directly borders on severe medical tragedy.
It really does.
And to understand the physical toll, we have to look closely at what happened to an American runner named William Garcia.
William Garcia was highly regarded, a strong contender for a medal, actually. And his experience strips away any comedic element of this marathon, revealing exactly how lethal James Sullivan's setup truly was.
Yeah. Garcia didn't just hit the wall and get tired. He was found collapsed on the side of the road, unconscious.
Totally unresponsive.
And when medical help finally reached him, they didn't diagnose him with simple heat exhaustion. They found he was suffering from severe, acute internal hemorrhaging.
He was bleeding internally.
Specifically from his stomach lining.
Which demands a careful medical explanation. Because how does running a marathon cause your stomach to bleed?
Right. That doesn't seem connected at all.
The answer lies in those official convoy cars we discussed earlier.
The cars kicking up the dust. But how exactly does dust lead to internal bleeding?
Well, the roads were covered in dry, pulverized dirt and silica.
Okay.
When you are running at maximum capacity, you are not breathing shallowly through your nose. You are breathing deeply, pulling massive volumes of air directly into your lungs through your mouth.
Sucking in everything around you.
Yes. And Garcia was trapped behind these cars, inhaling thick clouds of this particulate matter for miles.
So the dust is bypassing all the natural filtration systems of the nose.
Exactly. The silica particles are drawn deep into the respiratory tract, and these are microscopic, jagged pieces of stone and dirt.
Oh, wow.
They begin to mechanically abrade or literally tear the delicate tissue of the alveoli in the lungs, causing acute respiratory distress.
That sounds horrific.
And furthermore, he is swallowing massive amounts of this dirt mixed with whatever saliva he has left. This creates a highly abrasive sludge that travels down the esophagus and into the stomach.
It's essentially like swallowing liquid sandpaper while your body is under extreme stress.
Yes, exactly. The abrasive dirt literally lacerated his stomach lining.
Jeez.
And because his body was severely dehydrated, the mucosal lining of his stomach, which normally protects the tissue, was compromised. The dirt tore right through the tissue, causing acute gastrointestinal hemorrhaging.
The irony here is just horrifying. The very cars that were placed on the course by the organizers to monitor the runners, to ensure a fair and observed race,
Were the exact instruments that systematically destroyed William Garcia's internal organs.
it highlights a terrifying reality about the era's understanding of safety engineering.
There was none. There were no ambulances on standby. There were no medical tents every mile with IV fluids.
Nothing.
If you collapsed on those rural roads, you were entirely at the mercy of whoever happened to pass by and notice you in the ditch.
The period accounts are very clear that this was a near-death experience. Garcia had to be rushed to emergency medical treatment. He didn't just drop out. He very nearly died because the organizers prioritized the pageantry of an automobile escort over the basic respiratory needs of their athletes.
It firmly establishes that this wasn't just a poorly planned race. It was an environment of active medical negligence.
And speaking of the toll this environment took, the dust neutralized Garcia, but the brutal combination of heat, hills, and Sullivan's forced dehydration broke another athlete at the 9-mile mark.
Guys.
Which loops us directly back to the incredible scene at the finish line that we opened our deep dive with. We need to look closely at Fred Lorz.
Fred Lorz was a bricklayer by trade, training at the Mohawk Athletic Club. He was a genuinely talented, legitimate amateur runner. He wasn't a stunt entrant.
He was a real athlete, but at mile 9, his body simply gave out. He was racked with severe cramps.
To understand what happened to Lorz, we have to look at the physiology of severe cramping in a dehydrated state.
Okay, lay it on us.
When you sweat, you aren't just losing water. You are rapidly depleting your body's stores of critical electrolytes: sodium, potassium, magnesium, and calcium.
The stuff in sports drinks today.
Exactly. These minerals are essential for conducting the electrical signals that tell your muscles to contract and, crucially, to relax.
So without water to replenish those electrolytes, the communication between the nervous system and the muscles just misfires.
The muscle forcefully contracts, but the signal to release never arrives. The muscle locks up entirely, causing agonizing pain.
Ouch.
Lorz was experiencing this across his lower body. Continuing to run would have physically torn his muscle fibers.
So he did what any rational human being in severe pain would do. He quit. He stepped off the dirt road. And as a matter of pure convenience, he flagged down one of those official automobiles passing by.
Just hitching a ride.
His intention was completely innocent at this point. He just wanted to ride back to the stadium so he could get his clothes, grab a drink, and go home.
He climbs into the car, but we have to factor in 1904 automotive technology.
Oh, right.
Internal combustion engines of this era were incredibly rudimentary. They lacked efficient radiators and cooling systems.
They were prone to breaking down.
Very much so. Driving a heavy, primitive car at the slow speed of a runner on a 90-degree day with thick dust clogging the intake. It was inevitable.
After driving about 11 miles, the car overheats and completely dies on the side of the road. So now Lorz is stranded again.
But he's had an 11-mile rest.
Right. He's been sitting down, out of the direct sun. His heart rate is normalized. The cramps have completely subsided. And he realizes he's now relatively close to the Olympic Stadium.
So he makes a very practical decision. He decides to jog the rest of the way in, not to race, but just to get back to his belongings.
But this is where the psychology of the event takes over. Lorz enters the stadium. The crowd sees a runner approaching the finish line.
They have no idea.
They don't know he got out of a broken-down car. They just see an American athlete about to win the gold medal. The stadium erupts. The band starts playing. Alice Roosevelt stands up to greet him.
Lorz claimed afterward that he never intended to steal the victory. He insisted it was just a practical joke, that he was jogging in and suddenly everyone was cheering, and he just smiled and went along with it.
I find this psychological dynamic fascinating. Like, how does someone get trapped in a lie of that magnitude so quickly?
It happens fast.
At what point do you stop the president's daughter and say, actually, I took a car?
Yeah.
It seems like he was entirely swallowed by the momentum of the crowd.
It is a textbook example of collective delusion and compliance under social pressure.
Yeah.
The crowd desperately wanted a reality, an American victor overcoming brutal odds. They projected that reality onto Lorz with overwhelming sensory force. The noise, the applause, the high-status individuals greeting him.
It's intoxicating.
For a young bricklayer suddenly thrust into the center of this adulation, the social friction required to stop the music, silence the crowd, and admit he was a fraud was simply too high to overcome in the moment.
The path of least resistance was to smile, nod, and accept the wreath. It's the ultimate imposter syndrome, made entirely literal. He was a literal imposter.
But the truth always catches up.
Always. The witnesses who saw him get out of the car finally reached the stadium, and the lie unraveled. The Amateur Athletic Union was furious. They disqualified him immediately and banned him for life.
Though they later reduced it to a year after he apologized and maintained it was a joke that got out of hand.
But what strikes me as the most interesting coda to Lorz's story is that this wasn't the end of his athletic career.
No, not at all.
The very next year, in 1905, Fred Lorz entered the Boston Marathon, and he won it. Completely, legitimately.
I love that detail. It proves he genuinely possessed the cardiovascular engine and the talent to be a champion.
He just succumbed to the mathematically unsurvivable conditions of St. Louis like almost everyone else.
It is a nice redemption arc. But back in 1904, Lorz's disqualification left the Olympic officials in a state of panic. They had a stadium full of restless people, a gold medal, a wreath, and no winner. They urgently needed to identify the man who had actually covered the entire 24.85 miles on foot, the fastest.
And this is where the story pivots from a psychological farce into something deeply medically alarming.
The darkest part of the race, really.
Because they found their winner. But the real winner survived the course through means that would land a modern sports physician in federal prison today.
No question.
We have to talk about Thomas Hicks.
Thomas Hicks was a British-born American runner, a very capable athlete. But by the final 6 miles of this race, he was in a state of profound physical collapse.
The heat, the hills, the dust, and Sullivan's forced dehydration had absolutely broken his body.
Just decimated him.
The historical accounts describe him as fading, his skin turning gray, hallucinating, and begging his trainers for a drink of water.
If we look at the physiology of late-stage dehydration, Hicks was likely entering hypovolemic shock.
What does that mean exactly?
His blood volume was so low that his organs were being starved of oxygen. His brain was misfiring, hence the hallucinations.
Oh, wow.
His body was essentially shutting down all non-essential functions just to keep his heart beating.
But Hicks had a team with him. 2 trainers, Charles Lucas and Hugh McGrath, who were following him in one of those dust-kicking cars.
Right.
And these trainers were absolutely ruthlessly determined that their athlete was going to win the gold medal, regardless of the physical cost.
When Hicks begged for water, Lucas and McGrath refused.
They refuse.
They were strict adherents to the bizarre sports science of the day. They believed that giving him a cup of water would cause stomach cramps and ruin his race.
So instead of hydrating him, they decided to administer a specialized custom cocktail to force his body to keep moving.
A truly horrifying cocktail.
They sponge his mouth out with warm distilled water to relieve the dryness, but they don't let him swallow it. Instead, they give him a mixture of raw egg whites and brandy.
From a nutritional standpoint, raw egg whites provide some protein, but they are incredibly difficult to digest during intense exertion.
And the brandy.
Brandy is arguably the worst possible fluid you could introduce into a dehydrated system. Alcohol is a vasodilator. It opens up the blood vessels, sending blood rushing to the skin's surface, which further drops central blood pressure.
So it's making the shock worse.
Much worse. It is also a diuretic, forcing the kidneys to expel whatever precious little water is left in the body.
They were actively accelerating his dehydration. But that wasn't even the worst of it. Because when the egg whites and brandy didn't work, they introduced the primary ingredient of their cocktail.
Yeah, this is where it goes off the rails.
They administered a small dose of strychnine sulfate.
Strychnine.
Which is literally rat poison.
Today, yes, strychnine is globally recognized as a highly toxic, lethal pesticide. But we must understand the medical context of 1904.
Okay, context.
In very low doses, some doctors and athletic trainers used strychnine as a central nervous system stimulant. The era had 0 anti-doping regulations. There was no World Anti-Doping Agency.
So it was allowed.
What Lucas and McGrath were doing was completely legal. In fact, Charles Lucas wrote about it proudly in his post-race reports.
But wait, how does strychnine actually act as a stimulant. Like, what is it biologically doing to a human body that makes trainers think it's a good idea during a marathon?
It's a fascinating and horrifying mechanism. Strychnine doesn't give you energy. What it does is act as a powerful antagonist to glycine.
Glycine.
Glycine is an inhibitory neurotransmitter in your spinal cord. Basically, your brain sends a signal to contract a muscle, and then glycine sends the signal to relax the muscle.
So it's the brakes for your nervous system.
Exactly. Strychnine blocks the brakes. It prevents the glycine from binding. As a result, the motor neurons fire continuously without ever relaxing. The muscles go into a state of continuous low-level spasm or hyperreflexia.
It's like hot wiring a car, where you bypass the ignition and just send raw electrical current directly to the starter motor. The motor will turn over aggressively, but you are going to melt the wiring and destroy the engine in the process.
That is a perfect analogy. The strychnine forced Hicks's exhausted muscles to keep firing involuntarily. It kept him upright and moving through forced chemical spasm.
Just puppeteering him.
Basically. But as he continued to weaken, because, predictably, raw eggs, alcohol, and poison do not sustain cellular respiration, he began to collapse again.
He was walking, dragging his feet. His eyes were rolling back in his head. The hallucinations were intensifying. He thought he still had 20 miles left to run when he was only 2 miles away.
So what did Lucas and McGrath do? They saw their athlete failing, and they repeated the dose.
They gave him more.
They gave him more strychnine and more brandy.
They were systematically microdosing him with poison. Over those last 2 miles, Hicks was entirely divorced from reality.
He wasn't even there.
When he finally reached the stadium, the scene was horrifying. This wasn't a triumphant sprint through the tape. He crossed the line barely conscious.
They basically carried him.
He had to be physically held up, a trainer under each arm, practically dragging him across the finish line. His feet were just shuffling in the dirt.
The official medical reports indicate he required immediate, significant emergency intervention the moment he crossed the line.
I mean, obvious.
He could not stand, he could not speak. It took a team of doctors hours to stabilize him enough just to allow him to leave the stadium grounds.
Wow.
Thomas Hicks quite literally almost died to win that gold medal. The strychnine toxicity, combined with the vasodilation of the alcohol, the severe hypovolemic shock, and the physical exertion, brought his physiological systems to the absolute brink of total cascading failure.
It's just staggering. When you look at the archival photos of him sitting in the locker room afterward, he looks like a ghost.
Haunting photo.
He looks hollowed out, staring blankly. And that was the man they crowned the official, legitimate winner of the 1904 Olympic Marathon.
Which brings us to the profound historical aftermath and the true legacy of this disastrous afternoon.
Right.
Because Hicks survived, barely. Garcia survived the internal bleeding, barely. But the race itself left a massive casualty list that forced the young International Olympic Committee to look itself in the mirror.
They had to reckon with what they had allowed to happen.
Exactly. We have to look at the final statistics. Of the 32 official starters who lined up full of hope that afternoon, only 14 managed to finish the race.
14 out of 32.
A 43% completion rate.
It remains one of the worst completion rates in the history of the Olympic marathon.
And no wonder.
The other 18 men were victims of massive dust inhalation, severe dehydration, total muscular exhaustion, crippling stomach cramps, or being chased off the course by feral farm animals.
If we look at this through the lens of modern safety engineering, the 1904 marathon became a massive historical pivot point.
It changed everything.
It became the ultimate cautionary tale, a byword for catastrophic organizational failure. The Olympic organizers and the broader sporting world realized that if they continued to run endurance events under these unscientific, unregulated conditions, they were inevitably going to broadcast a live, highly publicized death.
The paradigm had to shift from viewing the marathon as this chaotic survival of the fittest endurance test to viewing it as a regulated athletic competition.
Yes.
So this specific disaster directly contributed to the foundational rules that you and I take for granted today.
It is the concept of regulations being written in blood, or in this case, in pulverized dust and strychnine.
Yes. Every time you watch a modern city marathon and you see those incredibly long tables manned by volunteers handing out hundreds of little paper cups of water and electrolyte drinks every single mile.
That infrastructure exists precisely because James Sullivan tried to deliberately dehydrate a field of runners in St. Louis.
Right. When you see perfectly measured, smoothly paved, barricaded courses with police escorts holding back traffic, that exists so no runner gets lost in a cornfield being hunted by a territorial farm dog.
And arguably the most vital legacy is that 1904 served as the genesis for the decades-long conversation about medical oversight and performance-enhancing drugs.
The doping conversation.
Yes. The horrific visual of Thomas Hicks being practically dragged across the finish line by trainers who had just pumped his system full of rat poison forced the sporting world to begin questioning things like, where does the line between stimulation and poisoning actually lie?
It took a long time to build the World Anti-Doping Agency and the strict testing infrastructure we have today. But the horrifying reality of what Lucas and McGrath did to Hicks was a crucial early catalyst for establishing boundaries in sports medicine.
It forced governing bodies to acknowledge that if they didn't protect the athletes from their own trainers, the pursuit of winning would naturally lead to lethal experimentation.
So every single safety protocol you see enforced in modern sports, every standardized distance, every medical triage tent at the finish line, every mandatory doping test exists because someone had to learn the hard way that the alternative looks exactly like a scorching, toxic Missouri afternoon in 1904.
It completely contextualizes the modern rule book.
It really does, and I think that beautifully brings us to the core tension of this entire deep dive.
The dual nature of it.
Exactly, because as we synthesize all these sources and look back at the 1904 marathon, we are forced to hold two completely contrasting ideas in our heads at the exact same time.
Yeah.
On one hand, this is undeniably the funniest blooper reel in the history of international sports.
It sounds like a comedy script.
You have a broke Cuban mailman cutting off his heavy trousers, chatting with the crowd, and taking a nap after eating rotten apples.
Right.
You have Fred Lorz deciding the Olympics are too hard, hitching a ride in a literal motor car, breaking down, and then accidentally faking a victory in front of the president's daughter due to crowd psychology.
Yeah.
It is pure, unadulterated comedic farce.
But at the exact same time, you cannot escape the fact that it was a genuinely frightening, lethal environment.
Very true.
William Garcia coughing up blood as his stomach lining hemorrhaged from inhaling pulverized silica. Thomas Hicks having his nervous system chemically hot-wired with strychnine by the very men tasked with keeping him safe.
Yeah.
14 finishers out of 32. Several men were incredibly lucky to escape that dirt road with their lives. Both things are true. It is deeply hilarious, and it is profoundly horrifying.
And as we wrap up, there is one more thread buried in this source material that really stuck with me, something that shifts how we view history itself.
Oh, this is a great point.
Because we noted earlier that the distance of this race was roughly 24.85 miles. The modern 26.2-mile standard wasn't firmly fixed until the London Games 4 years later, in 1908.
Yes, which was altered simply to accommodate the British royal family so the race would finish exactly in front of their viewing box.
Right, so the 1904 race wasn't just run under these bizarre, medically negligent, totally unregulated conditions.
Yeah.
It wasn't even a standard, mathematically comparable length.
No, not at all.
And it leaves you with this final, lingering thought to mull over. If the chaos, the strychnine, the dogs, the cars, the arbitrary distance, if this was the standard of organization at the absolute highest level of international competition, how many of the unbeatable athletic records and legendary tales of triumph from the early Olympic era are actually just products of unstandardized Wild West rules?
It forces a total reevaluation of early sports data, really. We like to view historical records as clean, linear metrics of human biological progress.
Like it's a straight line.
Right. We compare times from 1910 to times in 2020 as if they occurred on a level playing field. But the foundation of those early records isn't precise measurement. The foundation might just be chaos, arbitrary route drawing, and strychnine cocktails.
Exactly. The foundation is incredibly murky. It makes you wonder, how many historic victories from a century ago would we consider fundamentally illegitimate today because the courses were short, the water was deliberately withheld as a scientific experiment, or the winners were chemically fueled by rat poison?
A lot of them, probable.
Sometimes when you dig underneath the glory, the gold medals, and the brass bands, you don't find a superhuman athlete. You just find a guy getting out of a broken-down car, hoping no one notices.
Well said.
Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.